Thank you.
I got my keys, yeah.
Are you able to get
Well, I got
because I
it, I
just sent
already
you an
put it
email.
on
Saved
iAnnotate.
it, that's it.
I always put it on iAnnotate, so.
Oh, the
And I
online
pull it
site
up
is down right
first.
now?
So, yeah, I have
Oh, okay.
I know.
So, are we good?
But I didn't save it.
All right, we're gonna try this again. We'll call the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Carter,
Here?
Modis Castillo.
Here.
McGuire.
Here.
Ortega.
Aye.
Reinhardt.
Here.
McDonough.
Here, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning.
All right.
First item is to approve the agenda for July 9th, please.
Second.
Yeah, motion and a second. Roll call.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
Carter.
Yes.
Modis Castillo.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye.
Ortega. McDonough.
Aye. Next item is approving the minutes from June 25th, please.
Second.
Yeah, motion and a second. Any corrections? Roll call.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
Carter.
Yes.
Modis Castillo.
Yes.
McGuire. Ortega.
Aye.
McDonough.
Aye. Our next item is to hold a public hearing on body worn cameras to afford the public an opportunity to comment on the purchase, implementation, and policy governing the use of body cameras. I declare the public hearing open. I don't believe anybody has signed up to speak. No? Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak on the public hearing on body cams? Anybody in the audience that wishes to speak on the public hearing for body cameras? Third and final call. Anybody in the audience here to speak on the public hearing on body worn cameras? With that, I declare the public hearing closed. We're going to move on to the administrative items. And Commissioner Reinhardt, you have that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move item 6, the legislative platform. Number 7,
I'm going to pull 7, so
Okay.
we can talk about that. The sheriff's here.
number 8, number 9, number 10. Number 10 is the Veterans Affairs for outreach to homeless
Yes.
veterans. If you, I'm
pull
not sure
that
if,
one.
I was going to say. Took me a little longer there. Okay, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15.
May I have a second?
Second.
May I have a second? Roll call on the administrative items.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
Carter.
Yes.
Modis Castillo.
Yes.
McGuire. Ortega.
Aye.
McDonough.
Aye. Item 7 is from the Sheriff's Office. It's body worn cameras, implementation, personnel complement increase in the Sheriff's Office. And
I would
we
move
have a
approval.
motion. And do we have a second for discussion?
Second.
Second. All right, I'm going to open it up for discussion, comments, any questions? We have the sheriff and his team here, and Ryan and his team. Commissioner Mattis Castillo.
Yeah, I want to first compliment the sheriff's office for putting together a draft in great detail. And I was just wondering if there's a possibility that we could actually have them come up and ask a few questions
Well,
directly.
absolutely.
I never asked.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you. So I read the draft in detail, and it's very technical, so it took a little. There's a few places, obviously it's a draft, so a work in progress. There were a few places that I was contacted by community members with concern, and so I thought it would just be okay if maybe you could just talk us through. The concerns were mostly about data storage. Who gets to see the videotape? Will it be leaked to the internet? I see the storage site is you have to send it to a website where the video will be stored. There's a big concern about people's privacy. So if you can just talk to us a little bit about that, that would be great.
Right. Well, I think the standard in the industry today is that most data is stored in some form of remote cloud with high security. It would be great if we all could afford servers that collected all of our data, but that's just not the best practice any longer. So we've been assured, and there's never been a problem with this vendor in terms of a security breach. In terms of who can look at the data, we expect the supervisors to periodically and randomly monitor the individual deputies to see if they're recording when they're supposed to per policy. So the supervisors will have access. But there is an audit trail created every time someone's in there. So, in my interim life, I did audits of body camera systems, and so you can see who's been in there and for what purpose. They have to tag what purpose they're in there, and you can actually print out reports by individual officer if they're in there, which give you an indication someone's roaming the system. I don't think that happens much anymore in today's world since the big DVS scandal of officers, probing driver's licenses. People have been disciplined in a number of different areas because of that. So I am confident that we have the means of assuring appropriate security for individual privacy. We did have one individual raise the question about whether or not the data would be used by Axon for facial recognition software. And we've been assured by Axon that they will not use our data without our permission. Facial recognition is exploding throughout the country. It's not completely accurate, of course, and that's one of the problems, but there was some concern about this data being imported into other databases, and we've been told that will not happen, and the data is ours. So.
One,
If you're
a
going to move on to
different-
another question,
Sure.
County Manager
Yep.
O'Connor has a follow-up to this question.
Commissioner Mattis Castillo, members, I just wanted to add to the part about the server piece to it. So the Sheriff's Office has been in work with the Information Services Department to follow all information security protocol related to how cloud-based storage for the particular vendor would likely work. That's been mapped out with our IS department. And so I just want to assure you that from a data security perspective, this meets both industry and county standard for how that gets stored. I'll leave the policy piece to the rest of the answer to the sheriff's previous comments.
Thank you.
And I have a
Commissioner
follow-up to the question as far as there's going to be a record as far as who's accessing, but how does somebody gain that access in the first place? I mean, I would assume that it has to go through a manager or a supervisor or someone, that an officer can't just go in and look at it, even though it says that person was there. How did they get there in the first place?
The general protocols for these systems, and every department sets their protocols differently, but the general policy is the officer can see their own. So if they were at a call, they need to write the report, they can review and listen to they may have interviewed someone on body camera, they can make sure the report is accurate. And their immediate supervisor has access to monitor and make sure they're using it. Beyond that, generally, there's a department administrator that can have access. So it's based upon the individual officer, their supervisor, and then a department administrator.
Thank you.
Commissioner
I do
Mattis.
want to just add that, and it's probably mentioned in here, but we use St. Paul's policy as the model. We think they have, proved that their policy has stood the time. So we're comfortable that we're going to be consistent with them.
Commissioner Mattis Castillo.
Yeah, just one follow-on question, and this came up at the community meeting in Falcon Heights. And folks wanted to hear from you directly, because I know you weren't able to attend. I think you were
My
having
daughter
a
was having a
grandchild,
big
right?
grandchild, yeah, my third grandchild.
But folks just wanted to be able to hear from you, so this is for the benefit of the community. But the question was, will ICE be able to access these videotapes and use it in the future?
No,
Okay.
no. And we have very little relationship with ICE, as I've mentioned to you in the
Yeah.
past. There was one interesting question that came up I would like you to weigh in on, and I think Commissioner McDonough was there when this conversation took place. I'm assuming the rest of you. It's an interesting question. The question is whether or not a citizen who's making a report, a standard report, not an issue of domestic violence, but just, okay, my barbecue was stolen off my porch last night. And they call an officer, and it's December, and the officer's coming to make a theft report or garage burglary, and they invite them into their home. The question is, should the citizen have the right to not have the interior of their home recorded while the officer is taking the report? Now, most departments and most policies require that the officer keep the camera on from the beginning of the dispatching of the call till the end of it, which this policy requires as well. And that's the way the draft is. But I think there is a privacy question that should I have to have my interior home recorded while I'm making a police report that's non-controversial? Or should I have the right to ask that officer, would you mind turning the camera off? I can see both sides of the issue, to be frank with you. I don't like the concept of recording the interior of people's houses when there's no law enforcement reason really to be in there outside of taking the report. So if you have some thoughts on there in the next week or two or today, I'd love to hear them, because I could see a policy in either direction on that point. And part of the concern is, well, you know, what are they going to see? At this point, this data is private. But of course, there are movements to make this data more public. There are a lot of people that believe officers' activities should be public, like squad car cameras are predominantly accessible to the public. So could there be anything in your house, you know, that might be perceived as being questionable on the video? So, you know, think about that one, and if you have some initial thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Oh, just a couple thoughts here. I was at that meeting brought up. I think all of us know John Thompson, strong community advocate leader. He actually weighed in on that and suggested the camera should stay on. He felt pretty strongly. And I think, Sheriff, you pointed out, you know, using St. Paul's policy was really, I think, the work has been done, the fine tuning, the issues, but then having that consistency within the community, and I think having that consistency, I think raising that issue as it moves forward, to have it on the radar. But to me right now, it seems like, especially when the community members are saying it should be on, or at least one, very strong, and two, the consistency, but being aware that in the future, depending on accessibility and stuff, it might be something that
Right.
needed to be revisited. Commissioner Ortega.
Is there some way to sort of tier this depending on the request? So if I'm calling the sheriff's department because somebody stole my grill, that's one thing. If I'm calling because I feel somebody's it's been through my house,
Right.
that's another.
Right.
Is there a way to make that judgment, or if I request, since it's the grill, depending on why you're there, that request could be, if I ask you not to
Sheriff?
turn off the camera, but because it's about a grill versus somebody being in my house, you make that judgment.
Yes, there is a way to tier that. The mechanics of that would be somewhat subjective, but yes, there is a way to do that. And you know, there are some community members that think we should do that. I mean, Mr. Thompson, his argument is we don't want to have it suddenly turn where something goes wrong and we're not on video. But, you know, I will say this, we don't want to discourage people from calling us to make reports. It's a little bit like the not enforcing the ICE regulations. We want to encourage people to call us, and there are people that won't want to call us if they have to be on body camera when they're making the report, or they won't want, some of their friends or relatives might not want to stay there to help as witnesses if they're on body camera. And it's just the world that we live in that some people would prefer, and part of it's a trust. Yes, the cameras are there to help with transparency, and we will get there, but there also is this concern about facial recognition, and I'm now captured on government data, and do I really want to be there when the police are there? And, you know, maybe I'll just leave in before they get here. So,
My concern is that people won't call
right, mine too.
because of that. You know, let's say because my grill is open. I don't want the inside of my house filmed for a lot of reasons. It could be very, it doesn't have to be criminal.
Right. Or I'll at least wait, in my case, I'd at least wait till I clean my house.
Well-
Right, there you go. But that's not good either, right? So,
Mr. Carter.
Thank you. There was a lot of conversation about the possibility that an individual making a call and receiving an officer's response might not want their interaction recorded, and that there could be a request that the officer could respond to. This was at the public hearing at Hallie Q. Brown, and thank you for being there and having good discussion with the participants that were there. Incidentally, the summary says there were 2 at Hallie Q. Brown. There were actually 4. And I do have notes that you all took from that meeting. There were 2 names that were not recorded and 2 that were. Okay. And broad discussion that was summarized in the 5 points that you had there. And I realized the summary was necessary. But in any case, we did talk about the possibility that an individual could request that it not be recorded, and that at the officer's discretion, that could be, in fact, acknowledged and provided for. I do see that that is not inside the policy at this point in time, and I do think it's going to take some time to work through this, and that there is a possibility that we will be reconsidering that over time and responding to the actuality of what happens out in the field, even if it is not specified here. There are some things, however, that are specified that seem to go somewhat counter to the discussion that we've had, and I just really appreciate your insight on that. Officer discretion to record at any point in time, you know, certainly fights that perspective, but I understand the need for that to be there as well at this point in time. Just share with me what your thoughts are, though, about critical incident, which is not defined anywhere where I can find it. You know, critical incident is listed in the definitions, and it specifies that it will be defined inside the policy. I find it used inside the policy, but not defined. And I'm sorry I was jumping around trying to look at it last night and really couldn't find it, and I thought it was me, but I looked at the paper documents today and wasn't able to find where critical incident is defined. Can you tell me how that will be defined?
And hold that thought on critical incident, because back on the issue of activation of cameras, you mentioned some discretion. First of all, if a call is dispatched, if an officer or deputy receives the call, the camera is required to go on at that point, and it remains on through the entirety of the call until they clear the call, and then they turn their camera off. If an officer comes upon an incident that they know is going to require some type of police response, you mentioned a fight. If they come across a fight on the corner, or they see people arguing, they will check out on the radio and say, I'll be out with a fight or an argument at so-and-so. They're required to turn their camera on there. There's no discretion. If there's an incident that requires or needs some police response. Now, the third category is if they're stopping by a recreation center and they're just visiting. They're doing what's called a proactive police visit of checking in with people. Normally, the cameras would not be on, and suffice to say, I don't think you would want them on. You don't want police surveilling people just when they're out
That's
talking to the
exactly
community. But if something happens, or a fight starts between two kids, on the playground or something, well, and it's just an argument or something. If the officer's not quite sure yet if it's risen to the level of requiring a police call, they'd have some discretion. Hey, you guys, knock it off, and boom, it's over. Now, if he says, hey, you guys, knock it off, and they continue to argue, boom, activate the camera, get on the radio, and say, I'll be out with a disturbance at the playground. So that's where the part about discretion comes in, when they're out in the community just visiting. Now, regarding critical incident, I think the standard definition of critical incident is any time deadly force is used, by a law enforcement officer. It doesn't mean that they actually killed someone, but if some form of deadly force is used, a handgun or something else. And it's my intent, like Chief Axtell, to make sure that those videos are released in a timely fashion. I'm troubled by the lengthy delay that has been used by the BCA. I think the BCA timeline doesn't balance the need for public accountability. And Todd Axtell, Chief Axtell, is as well. So he's made a commitment to get those videos released in a more timely fashion. There's really no reason that a 30-day window for a deadly force investigation isn't long enough to interview all the key witnesses and get to that point. But in any case, 60 days is way longer than necessary before releasing. So obviously, every investigation is slightly different, but it might be my goal to have a 30-day goal of releasing any video capturing a critical incident, and I would say in no way should it ever take longer than 2 months, even if the county attorney hasn't made a decision about prosecution.
May I thank you? I want to thank you for separating those two issues. As I read critical incident, listed in the agenda on page 1 and 2, and then as I turned to it, I wasn't really sure if critical incident would be the definition of when an officer should activate. And I read the area on page 15 that describes critical or significant incident. I didn't find that definition that you just gave.
Yeah, we can
I
clear that up.
suggest-
We
yeah.
can expand upon that.
All right.
And before we have a final policy.
Okay, that would be helpful because I just didn't know how to interpret that. I understand it per the comments that you've made. May I ask an additional question?
You have the floor.
Thank you. I also understood as we started talking about the policy that there would be phases, and you have described as you have presented in this request for action that there will be phases of implementation. The first being patrol, the second being within the facility, in the detention facility, and the third being courts, I believe.
Right, let me just interrupt. I think it's fair to say that we're going to have to flip that a little bit. Patrol will be first, and quickly on the heels of that, the courts. Most of the policy regarding body cameras for law enforcement officers is dictated by state statute. And there are specific statutes regarding body cameras for law enforcement officers. So, our policy is consistent with state statute, but the data issues also have to be consistent in terms of release. There are no specific policies for body cameras in jails. And so then we revert back to existing law regarding security data, detention data, jail data. And Kim Parker is here from the county attorney's office if you need or have any additional questions on the data issues. Our intent is to work with corrections and to draft a policy in the next 60 days that we all agree on, so that we had uniformity between the sheriff's office and community corrections. A policy that reflects state law regarding those areas, but also reflects the desire of you and the community to access that data when there is an allegation of excessive force or something. But we will have a separate policy that will incorporate everything we can here, but will also mean that there is greater public access to the videos from the jail than there is in current state law regarding police officers. Does that make some sense, or?
It does make some sense, and I thank you for answering that question in advance. I do believe that the jail is different enough from the use on patrol or in other public spaces that it does require that very careful policy discussion and framing that should also align with the work that is done at Ramsey County Correctional Facility. So I'm glad that you're already in that discussion. I believe it's different enough that we would also want to hear more about that as that policy is being derived and before it is implemented. It's wrapped up all here, and you know, as well as the purchase and implementation of all of that is within this particular request.
Right.
So as we carefully work with you to, you know, acknowledge your need to see that here, we also want to carefully work with you. I think this board does in order to see that
I'm
implementation.
completely with you on that. And while purchasing the equipment is in one lump because the cost saving is significant, before we would implement cameras in the jail, we would develop a policy, a draft policy, and ask for your input here in the next 2 months that sets those standards. And, you know, the corrections staff, of course, are here, and we've visited with them. Chief Deputy Methuselah has been in contact with them about working on a policy that works for everyone.
Right.
So we'll
And
get there.
acknowledging that a role of community input is also appropriate as that policy is
Absolutely.
developed.
And as you know, we did get some community input
Yes.
during these cycle on the jail issues as well. But
You
clearly,
will-
there is concern about accountability inside jails because they're not publicly accessible for other people to monitor
Right, right.
outside of the public.
And I know you were very careful to state that this step was, you know, the first phases of implementation and that it would take more work to get that policy for the jails. I appreciate how you've described that that work will actually occur. Thank you very much.
I just want to follow up and clarify, because I think one of the key things you highlighted that's going to be important moving forward is to work with corrections, because there could be a day when we implement a body cam policy in the correctional facility, and having the consistency between those policies in a very similar environment is going to be really important. And, you know, being able to come back to us with that policy, since you've indicated that there's going to be some needs to be a little bit different than this policy, is going to be important. But look forward to that. And Commissioner Carr raised the issue about potential public input in on that, and I just wanted to maybe get a clarification so when we all leave here, we understand what you are thinking about that, since there's going to be some differences between that policy and this policy.
Well, we can replicate what we've done. Those of you that were at the meetings know there wasn't a tremendous number of people there. Or we can have a meeting, a public hearing here. My guess is we should at least have one evening session somewhere where the community can come, and then one here. So, you know, we'll at least do 2 community meetings in the evening, and then bring the policy back here for you if that seems appropriate.
Thank you. All right. Ortega on this, and then have McGuire and Reinhardt.
So now that we put in the policies, once we work out the kinks, and as you know, I've been advocating for 3 years to get moving on this, but there were good reasons. The state needed to develop policies. So once we take all this input, whether it's from the community, from the board, when we start implementing, I guess, what is the follow-up to us? We tend to put things in place, and then it's like the business is done. And I would like to see some follow-up from the Sheriff's Department, where maybe you give us a 6 months report or a 1 year report to look at, but a very honest report, so it's not about being critical about anybody, but it's about how do we refine the policy? Because we're not gonna come off the gate with a perfect
Right.
animal here.
I think that's a great idea. Report back in 6 months on our progress. Make sure, as you said a year ago, that we've actually purchased a cell phone.
Well,
Remember that? And,
no, no.
and implemented it.
I'm more concerned to have that we don't have folks coming here, that we have an honest evaluation.
Yes.
It isn't about being defensive, it isn't about, it's
Right.
about how is it working, how do we make it better?
Yep. No, I think that's consistent with what should happen. And just on the timing, and you have been an advocate, Commissioner Ortega, I want to thank you for that, of moving ahead. Commissioner Mata Castillo and I were at 3-year anniversary of Philando Castillo's death in Falcon Heights on Saturday. And I do think that, you know, it's time that we actually get this done. So I appreciate your support, all of you that have been supportive of this along the way. And it's important that we have the best available information when a critical incident happens so that the community can weigh in, you can weigh in, and we can judge our practices where they need to be, and did we err or not, and need to be held accountable. So this is really a way to hold us accountable as well. So.
Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Sheriff Fletcher, and everyone who's here about this issue. And thank you for having the public hearings that you had in other parts of the county. I know this is an issue that a lot of people care about. So just because nobody came to our public hearing, I know that people really are concerned about this, and they want us to do it right, and they want your office to do it right. And so I appreciate the care that you're taking with balancing, you know, all of these issues that we've been talking about, people's right to privacy versus we need to know what really goes on in these cases. So just thank you for that. And I know that this is one of those cases which I think we probably have a fair amount of in the county, that people may not let you know what they think, but when you don't do it the way they want it, they'll let you know. So, but we really want to take care with this issue. So thank you for that. Just a couple of other comments specifically on some, and then a couple of questions. You asked a question, you know, what to do when you go to a person's house and they've just had a theft or something. And I was, you know, I've read through your materials, and I'm not sure that I could see. Is there a permission granted or just a notice given? Like when you walk up to the house and you say, okay, I'm here to talk to you about your theft. We're on camera because we're required. So is there a place you want to go, or do you want to do it outside? Or so I'm just wondering if a conversation like that is maybe part of the protocol where people are just on notice. Because I think for me, you're right. I may prefer one room or the other if I'm going to be on camera. So and still knowing that information is not like it's going to be on Channel 5 News that night, but at least somewhere it is. So if you could address that, and then I'll have other questions.
Yeah, the policy does urge and encourage officers to give notice.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily require it because sometimes things are happening very quickly and there are other things more important that they need to be concerned about. But clearly in non-threatening, non-urgent matters, it's strongly encouraged that they advise the person. Now, the camera is boldly mounted right in the middle of the officer's chest. It's, you know, there are some smaller cameras, ours are not, and generally there'll be a light indicating something's going on. So there is now become a reasonable expectation that people kind of know officers have body cameras, but our deputies are encouraged by policy to tell them, you know, ma'am, I have a body, just to let you know I have my body camera rolling.
Well, I appreciate that. I would encourage you to go a little stronger, and on those non-emergency, on those non-emergency sort of routine police interactions, that you give notice that, you know, that would be the case, that you would say, hey, we're on camera, just to remind people. So I appreciate you thinking about that. So just a couple of other questions. I think, I know it's in the materials, but I just want to get clarification. So can people request it to be on or off? I mean, I know you have the procedures of when police officers, but If it's not if it's not a procedure where police officers have to have it on, people can request it. I know it's been talked about even today, but.
Can you give me an example of what type of
Okay, so
situation?
someone comes in and they says, I want this on camera, even though it wouldn't have been a procedure that would have been on camera, like a non-emergency situation, but someone is nervous and doesn't have a lot of trust, and they say, I want this to be taped.
Well, if they're making a police incident report of some sort, the camera should come
It
on.
should come on.
Should come on.
Okay, so-
If you're out in the park, at the playground with a proactive police visit, and someone came up and said, hey, I want to talk to you about something that went on, I'm not happy about, and I want it on camera, I think most deputies would agree, hey, I'm going to protect myself and get it on camera as well. So there's still discretion, but I can't see a reason that if a person was insisting that we wouldn't put it on camera.
Thank you for that. And then, once these procedures are in place, I appreciate it. Commissioner Ortega said, we'd like a report, how are they going, how is it working? These are procedures that can be changed then. If it's not working out, it can be
Correct.
changed, right? Is there a format for that, or is it just, will they change as you need to? Or I'm just curious how you're seeing that.
Well, we would change them as we see a need to, but we clearly, if we change something, we will report back to you in 6 months as to what we saw necessary to change. I'm not going to change any major chunk, without checking back with you, such as the issue of, having citizens turn the cameras off. But I think we will have another discussion about that at some point. There's a balancing that needs to go on here. A person shouldn't have to stay outside in the cold if they don't want you in their house to report a theft. So, and maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe it remains recorded, the audio recorded, but the people just say, I don't want you to record the video of the inside of my house. So maybe there's a way to deactivate the video portion and keep the audio. So we're going to look at those things as we move forward. But as you say, we don't want to delay implementation. It'll be a work in progress for many years. And frankly, I'll tell you this, the data side of it will be a work in progress because many people want access to this. And I'll give you one example. Squad car camera video of a traffic stop is generally accessible because it's squad car camera and it's out on a street in a public venue. There is a strong argument, very strong argument, that if a police officer's on a traffic stop and if a citizen can videotape that traffic stop from the sidewalk, why wouldn't the police officer's body camera video be equally accessible as the squad car camera? Why wouldn't that be in a category where that becomes public versus inside a house where there's an active domestic or a problem? So I think you will see movements, and I know Don Gemberling, who you all know is the guru of this, has been strongly advocating to open up this data, at least the data that is recorded in a public venue, because there are so many private sector video cameras anyhow that are recording public sector venue. There are people with cell phone cameras. Why wouldn't the police officer body camera recorded in a public area be accessible to the public as well? So stay tuned as we work through the legislative process. I think you'll see changes there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Reinhardt.
Well, I guess, there's a lot of questions that are raised. It sounds to me, though, that the city of St. Paul does not have an exception coming into someone's home. And I think that, as soon as we have the body-worn cameras, which are very necessary in today's world, there are times when people don't necessarily want to be videotaped, but they're going to be. Because that's the world we live in right now. As far as, is there also, for something that is the grill gets stolen, can you not call in and take the report over the phone? Why would you have to send an officer out?
Right.
And so there are other ways I would assume that there are other ways to report something that does not mean that an officer has to come and sit in your living room to deal with the report. I would think that is something that would be really important. And so there are ways to do it without being videotaped, but you have the audio tape because it's on the phone or whatever. I think also that for the officer's sake, okay, so somebody says, hey, my girl was stolen, come on out here. Yeah. And if you don't have that camera on, maybe it wasn't an actual grill that was stolen and you're being set up. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons where to me, it's a slippery slope.
Pros and cons to the whole issue.
And so there are ways that you don't have to allow somebody in your home to be on videotape. It's more convenient to be inside the home if it's December. But, maybe, I don't know, can someone when you come out, can you go into the squad car and do the report with the person in the squad car with you?
Sure.
So
there's ways around, workarounds. I'm not sure that not having an officer have face-to-face contact is necessarily where we want community policing to go either. But there are ways around it. But let's agree we'll move ahead the way it is, and in 6 months we'll reevaluate, see where we're at.
Well, and that's, to me, again, I would feel strongly that since it is working for the city of St. Paul, and to me it is about the individual that's been harmed, but it's also about the officer. And the moment you do something where you turn that camera off when it is supposed to be, or generally accepted to be on, you're in trouble.
There's no dispute that most deputies would prefer to have the camera on when they're inside someone's home so there isn't some type of accusation. That's not in dispute. The balancing act here is members of the community not always wanting it, but it's a work in progress. We'll just keep revisiting it, and there'll probably be 3 additional issues that will come up between now and January.
Thank you. Commissioner Carter.
I'm not going to elongate this, but only to say that members of the public have become accustomed to the fact that when you're doing an interview, an officer could audio tape that interview. So this is a change in that whenever you're doing an interview now, in a non-dangerous circumstance or assumably non-dangerous, an officer is recording video. That's just different, and it's going to take some time for you all to work through that and to share with us the experience. But just as you notify typically that you're recording audio, it would seem that it would be a natural thing to notify on non-critical incidents or non-dangerous incidents, that is, reports, for example, inside someone's home. It would seem natural to notify that it is being recorded. I hope that will be the experience, as I think the public has become accustomed to the audio tape and will become accustomed to the videotape. But that notice seems to me to just be a consideration that should be given.
I agree. Thank you. Commissioner Mattis-Castillo.
Yes, just one quick follow-up question. First of all, I think on this topic, as long as we've got that data and who's seeing it is controlled, is really going to solve the problem of leave it on or leave it off. It's really about who's going to see it in the long term and how it's being used. And in that sense of who's going to see it, I had one other follow-up question about, the review of the material. You've said it's been supervisors are going to take a look at it. Is there an opportunity, and I've looked at different drafts and policies across the country, but is there an opportunity for a non-uniform civilian oversight review just for cases of misconduct or audits, which really helps, just kind of correct and adjust policy? Is there that opportunity? I didn't see it in this policy.
Yeah, I don't know if the issue, you're talking about internal affairs complaints or people making a complaint and how we review that, or are you talking about ongoing review?
Ongoing review or periodic review and audits.
If you would like to fund a civilian position to do that, I would be glad to have one.
Great. We have that on record. We'll see how that goes.
We got a budget process
Yes.
we got to follow
Yes.
here. The sheriff, I hope, is well aware of.
Yes.
All right, any follow-up to that?
That's it. Thank you very much for your work on this.
Thank you for your help and support.
Seeing no other questions, all my questions and comments have been addressed except for one. I'm going to refer to section 33, discovery of potential misconduct on page 23. And you identify officers who witness, officers, sergeant reviewing, supervisor reviewing, and all the way up to commander or sheriff reviewing data where they observe violations of department. But you use the word should, encourage, and shall intermittently in there. And it seems to me, especially with the situation that we had at the jail and the conversation we had about duty to report, shall should be the consistent word used in there. We're not encouraging officers to report violations. I mean, we're expecting them to do that. And so I wanted to get your feedback there, but I would hope we could amend that to just use the word shall wherever we're using encourage or should.
No problem. Yeah, this is, like I said, taken directly from St. Paul's policy, but we can certainly update to be
I think
consistent
that's
with
one
the
of the things
policy
we've learned
that
since
we,
then.
that we adopted last year regarding
So if you're
duty to
comfortable with
report.
that, we would just
Yep.
substitute shall in all the places encouraged or should
problem.
be used. Thank you. Any other comments? Sheriff, I want to thank you and your team and the work you've done. I know, it was important to you to get this moved forward quickly. It was part of your campaign. I think you've honored your commitment to the community that you ran on and the staff that you've put together on this. I want to recognize Scott and his team and working with your folks to get us to this point. I do want to recognize, at the workshop, the board was pretty, raised the issue about the community engagement process, and I think you really stepped up there with the number of community engagement opportunities. And also just want to, recognize your commitment to working with Scott and corrections on the jail, potentially corrections policy. That could be a shared policy, and coming back in the future on that. And then as Commissioner Ortega, you talked about 6 months. I'm not sure if 6 months is the right time, but I would rely on you and Scott and the county manager sometime within, within the next year. What if 6 months is the right time? Come back with a follow-up with the board about how this is working out would be.
Well, and Ryan O'Connor hasn't been mentioned in your or me, but he's been very instrumental in helping get this brought to fruition, and of course coordinating us and Scott and corrections, and I appreciate his leadership on this as well. So I know you do as well. It goes without saying. Thank you.
Any further discussion? So we've had a motion. I don't know if we need to officially amend the motion for those word changes in the policy. I think the sheriff has indicated he's willing to make those changes. So I don't feel like we need to actually make it, but I'll leave it up to my colleagues here. I'm confident with the sheriff saying he'll make those changes that will occur.
Well, as the maker of the motion, there's no reason not to say as amended.
As amended,
Yes.
Okay, fine. So as amended to change those words to shall in section 33. No further discussion. Roll call.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
Carter.
yes.
Modis Castillo.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye.
Ortega.
Aye.
McDonough.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Yes.
Did
Yes.
we actually
Yes, we
pull?
pulled number
We
10.
did pull, we pulled 10.
Yes.
All right.
I'd like
So,
to move number 10.
Veteran Services Joint Powers Agreement with the Minnesota Department of Veteran Affairs for outreach to homeless veterans. Commissioner Mattis Castillo moves. We have a second.
Second.
Commissioner Mattis Castillo.
Yes, I just wanted to highlight this really awesome opportunity. We, as you know, we've been addressing the issue of homelessness in Ramsey County very creatively and working forward on that issue. And but to specifically call out our homeless veteran population, as of last week on the registry, we had 50 veterans on that list. That number ebbs and flows. Last year, we had, we started at a certain point, but served a number more veterans than we we had even identified. So this is a moving target, and so the opportunity to partner with the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs to really tackle this issue of veteran homelessness is great. And so I met with Maria Witherall and her team last week, who are really digging in to how we do this in a different way and engaging our partners. And so these funds and this partnership is allowing us to hire another veteran that's going to do outreach on the street, Chris Vinden, who is a fellow Marine that I know very well. So we're going to get there, and I just wanted to call that out because it's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Roll call.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
Carter.
Yes.
Modis Castillo.
Yes.
McGuire. Ortega. McDonough.
Aye. County Manager O'Connor, County Connections.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, just one update for everybody today. It kind of dovetails with the previous comments by Commissioner Mattis Castillo as well on just the broader homelessness work going on. We had a workshop approximately a month ago talking about unsheltered homelessness. There's a meeting this Wednesday at which time we're convening the various players across Ramsey County and the region to talk about trying to develop that consortium model to deliver services at the safe space that the board discussed, as I mentioned at the previous workshop. At the same time that meeting's going on, I'll be with my peers across the region, the other administrators and their staff, talking about the unsheltered regional homelessness issue as well. So we're doing double duty at the same time on the continued push. I think Ramsey County's efforts in the safe space area remain the most tangible efforts, I believe, right now going on across the region to be ready for August 1st and the potential the closure of the Green Line on the overnight hours. Tomorrow is a big step to fully understanding the landscape and what we can do and what that all looks like. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention with more to come.
Great, thank you. Outside board and committee reports, we'll start with Commissioner Reinhardt.
It's been a while. We had I'll go back and really do the highlights. The Ramsey, the Recycling and Energy Board met and are moving forward and really looking at what the joint activities are going to be. And I think it was a very good discussion there. And our partners in Washington County, I'm confident, will step up to the plate here, but we will see as we go forward. And I think, that's the whole point of a partnership like that, is to sit down and have the full discussion and figure out where you want to be and how to get there. So I appreciated the fact that Commissioner McDonough was able to be at that meeting as the alternate, but I think it was important that the discussion include the chair of our board. So special thank you for you being there. We followed, Commissioner Mattis Castillo and I followed the Recycling and Energy Board meeting with a conservation tour. And it was great to see the different things across our county, the projects that are being done, how it's being done, the invasive species equipment, yes. and how we deal with that, and the equipment that we have. And I believe that was something that was provided to us through a grant, if I remember correctly, and it really makes a difference as far as spreading of invasive species. So it was great. It was kind of rainy that day, but it worked. And I guess other than that, I think, just the normal meetings, just actually one other thing, and that is the Friends of the Ramsey County Care Center, or the nursing home, the nonprofit that is out there, had its annual fundraiser at the Golf Dome in Maplewood, and it was very well attended, and it was incredibly hot that day. And so it was great to see so many people out there, and it was a great success, and so it was really nice to be out there for that as well. Manitou Days is over. I had a great time with that. Market Fest is still going on, so on Thursday evenings, if you want to come out and have some family fun, come out to White Bear Lake.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Mattis Castillo.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that this weekend, the sheriff mentioned earlier, but he and I attended Restoration Day and Unity Day out at Falcon Heights, really to commemorate or memorialize the shooting of Philando Castile and to move the community through healing. And so the city of Falcon Heights has declared each year that those same days are Restoration Day and Unity Day. They have a movement to make that in state law, to really think about how do we stop and bring our communities through healing, talk about gun violence, talk about the murder of Black and brown bodies, and really get to that, what are we doing about it? Valerie Castile was there and spoke very passionately about the murder of her son, and that it was truly a murder, and that we need to say his name, and we need to call it what it actually is, and really encourage the community to don't just talk about it anymore. It isn't a conversation, that we need to move to action, because the number of Black and brown bodies still being murdered is on the rise. We had another shooting last night in my district on Larpenter Avenue at the Lamplighter, and so thinking about how do we address this gun violence in a really concrete way, and to not tiptoe around it, and to take real direct action. And I know we're doing that here at Ramsey County, thinking about how do we not just, there was a Guns Down event, we're having community conversations, but that we're really doing prevention, that we're reducing the number of gun violence, as well as healing from our community. And without that whole process, we're not going to really address it. So it was a great reminder by Valerie Castile to keep us in the action of work around gun violence, as well as remembering her son, Philando Castile.
Thank you. Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. A lot of things going on in the community this past couple of weeks, and I'll just mention a few of them. I was able to attend at Penumbra Theater Region's event celebrating the upcoming birth center that is actually in construction right at this point in time. It was a great overview of services innovation that will be occurring in the birth center, with a focus on overcoming the birth disparities amongst women of color, in particular African American women. New executive director spoke and shared her hopes and dreams for the center, and also engaged community support at that time. Thank you for mentioning the gun violence and the epidemic that we seem to be experiencing, and our need all to be hands in to encourage young people and to eliminate gun violence. I want to appreciate that Mentoring Young Adults, which is a nonprofit organization within our community, conducted a Guns Down event in collaboration with and at High School for Recording Arts on University Avenue. There was good attendance. Our county attorney and our sheriff were recognized for participating in partnership with Mentoring Young Adults. It was an event that encouraged both young people and their parents and community to engage together, not only in a focus on guns down, but in picking up those things which are positive and necessary and essential for a healthy life and community. Education, pro-social after-school activities, engagement with community, and positive mentoring. So it was wonderful to have that second event. I think within the past 6 months, another had occurred, and to look forward to those positive activities that are ensuing as a result. So thank you to Mentoring Young Adults, to High School for Recording Arts, and to all the sponsors there. I attended the St. Anthony Park 4th of July parade. It is the only 4th of July parade in St. Paul. It's a short walk, but it was a great day. It rained a little bit. Still, there was a community gathering that paralleled all of the others that have happened throughout the years. And I just want to thank the young people who gave speeches on being neighbors, being good neighbors, and really represented what we all need to do to welcome each other, to embrace each other, to see beyond our differences, and to share together in our community. So thank you to the St. Anthony Park community. I want to mention John Schumacher, who is executive director, has been for a long time, is going to be departing that particular role, as still in community, but taking a lot of time with relatives and children and grandchildren. And then Little Mekong Market held its evening event over a couple of days this weekend. There was no rain, lots of vendors and entertainment. It happens right on my street on Western Avenue, and it was incredibly packed. Just a wonderful event. If you haven't been before, it is a great time with family and friends and people from all over Ramsey County, and Minneapolis and Hennepin County were there to participate. So you're welcome. Great event.
Lots of great food and entertainment also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was there on Saturday night.
You were.
Love it.
Commissioner
So
McGuire.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Just continuing with the theme of great community festivals, Roseville did have their entire Rose Fest, which is a week-long event, parade, Taste of Rose Fest, which is their taste put on by Rotary with the sponsorship of a lot of restaurants. The Tour of Roses, Fun Run and Roll, and I know that that's something that people from around the region like to do. So great job to Roseville on a great community festival. Also, upcoming ones, St. Anthony Village Fest is coming up in a couple of weeks, New Brighton Stockyard Days and Little Canada Canadian Days. So just to acknowledge the great work that our communities do in, really sponsoring community events. On the theme of prevention and what we all support and care about, I will be attending a day-long meeting sponsored by Pritzker on the prenatal to 3 work that's being done throughout the country, and that's on Thursday. And so we're just focused on helping our families, multi-generational and of all types, to really work with our kids as early as possible. So I'll be reporting back on that.
Great.
And we'll be sharing a lot of information of what we're already working on. We are a big partner in that. We're a recipient of their grants, and we'll be reporting on the work that we're doing at that, and I'll give a report back when I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Immediately after adjournment here, we have a workshop that Commissioner Carter will be chairing. And then 11:30, we have a lunch and learn on racial equity. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you. Anything I need to sign, Jen?
And then we're, I'm leaving.